Do you guys want to introduce what we're doing, or do you want me to talk about this
Sure,
proposed solution?
I'll do some work.
Okay.
I'm sure you heard the announcement a little bit in there, but we're trying to work with IT to set up a hard drive in studio attached to a wireless network. That network probably won't be attached to the internet of everything else, but it'll at least be a way that you can connect to a drive so that you can host a shared model for your team. So rather than trading your model back and forth between your laptops, you can host it there, and both of you can work simultaneously on the model to develop it over the next, not quite 2 weeks, actually. And hopefully you'll be done, I don't know, a few days early so you can actually fly on time and stuff like that. But anyway, hopefully that network will be set up by Wednesday, so that you can host your model there, and then at least for over the weekend, you'll be able to work on it shared model. If you're in the studio, log into that dedicated wireless network that is only attached to that drive. All right, and so Jeremy is going to explain how to set up your model and have it hosted locally for you to work as a team.
So one of the tabs here in Revit, and you don't necessarily have to have Revit open for this tutorial, but basically everything we're going to be talking about today has to do with the collaboration section of Revit. When you work in an office, this is something you will do on a daily basis, because hardly ever is anybody just working on a model all by themselves all the time. Although I have had many projects that way, usually you do end up having some help eventually, and there's needs to be ways where multiple people can work in a model at the same time. Revit is designed for that purpose, but in order to work in that manner, there's a couple things that you need to know. Number one, essentially what you're going to be doing is exactly what you just heard Jefferson talk about, is there's going to be a wireless router that's going to be tested here, set up in the studio, that's going to be connected to a hard drive. That hard drive is going to be the place, when I talk about in this tutorial, where you're saving your central model. That's where the central model has to be saved, is going to be on that hard drive. Then you're going to be working on your own computers, but having a direct connection to this basically wireless router or that hard drive as you're working. What that will enable you to do is that multiple people can be in your model at one time. So obviously you're in groups of 2 or 3, I believe. So you'll actually be able to be in the same exact model at the same time, and you'll be modeling, noting, doing your drawings, rendering, whatever you have to do in order to sort of complete the job. So what you see up here on the screen is just it's kind of one of my progress projects that I'm working on at the moment. It's not currently set up as a collaborative project. It is just basically I've only been working in it up until this point. So up until this point, you have probably been, I've heard, saving your Revit file and passing it off to the other person to then do some more work, and then you're passing it back and forth. So basically you're losing downtime with the pass because the other person can't work on the file, or you're having to, I assume you're doing some other portion of the required work in another program or something like that. So what you would want to do is in only one model, okay, you're only going to do this in like, one person's, whoever has the final model at the moment, the person who had the last pass, you're going to want to go into the Collaborate tab. Once you're in the Collaborate tab, there is this button over here called Work Sets. As soon as you enable this feature, essentially you're going to be turning your model into what's going to be called a shared model. And 2 things to note about this is that once you do this and you save this onto that hard drive, you can never move that model ever again. We can later, but I'll tell you how to do that at the end. But while you're working towards your studio and your end and your final project, you're going to want to keep that central model right there on that hard drive, wherever it's going to be in the studio. So what happens here is I'm going to click on Work Sets, and you'll get this little warning that pops up that says, by the way, you're about to enable this. Are you sure you really want to do this? Because you can't go back. Well, this is an old dialog box, actually, because in the newer Revit, you can now detach from central and make your own, kind of get it back to this location. So all you're going to do is hit OK. And one thing you're going to notice here is it'll take a little minute here to kind of generate. But what's going to happen is up here at the top left, you're familiar with seeing that little disk icon, you know, the floppy disk to hit save. You'll know that you've enabled work sharing when you see where the wheel is spinning. You'll see this other icon will eventually, here in a little bit, will become highlighted. That is going to be an additional save button that is going to be called Save to Central. So anyway, it's going to show you this dialog box here where it wants you to, you can actually make work sets. You don't really need to worry about this. But if you're in an office, you might actually have core and shell broken out, interior, structure, and all these different categories here. But for now, you're probably just going to want to hit OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a file save as project. And in here where it says options, if you click on that, it should say that with this checkbox, when I do this save, it's going to make this the central model after save. It's already grayed out, so you can't really change that from this particular location. What this means is this is where you're going to want to make sure you're connected to your wireless router, and you're going to browse to that particular hard drive that's on that wireless router, so however that's going to be set up. And then if there's going to be a folder in there or wherever it's going to be, this is where you want to browse to. So say that I've already done that. And then I'm going to go ahead and give this a unique name. Let me just, I'll call this Central. Now as soon as I do this, it will make this the central model. You don't work in the central model. You just want to eventually do this, and when we hit save, so you can see here I've got that icon is now set up where it says synchronize and modify settings. What I'm going to do now is close out of this. So what you will do when you want to both work in the model or have the whole group access the model, you're going to open up Revit. And what you're going to do is go to Projects and Open. And you're going to browse to wherever that central model is. You know, so again, you have to make sure you're on the wireless network. And when I click on that, you'll notice down here at the bottom, there's this checkbox called Create New Local. So you want that to actually be, it should automatically be checked once you click on this. And when I click Open, what that's really doing is it's making a local copy of the model on your own computer. Does that make sense? So what that means now is when I do a save as, I'm going to go ahead and save this. And on my own computer, it will already have the name of your file, so whatever it was, and at the end it's automatically going to put your initials or whatever your computer name is. You know, you typically when you log into like Word and all these other programs, you have your initials already in there. What it's going to do is tag on to the whatever your file name was. It's going to tag on your initials, and then you can go ahead and save that locally to your C drive on your computer. So now you can go ahead and just start working, and you can start doing whatever you need to do. So I'll just kind of move things around. But so if you move something, if I touch this wall, what's going to happen is as I'm touching an object, this is going to be transmitting information back to that central model, saying that, by the way, this person has actually touched this wall and has it in their control. Which means if your other group member tries to come to this wall and do something, it's not going to allow them to do it. You'll actually get a warning message that will pop up that will say, by the way, so-and-so has control of this wall. You need to ask them for permission. And later on, you can grant permission to them. But all this means is as you're kind of working, you're both working in the model at the same time. You can do whatever you want. But the difference is when you hit save, so you've been used to hitting this icon, that saves to the local copy of your Revit file that's on your C drive. This other one, probably after you've done maybe 15 minutes of work or 10 minutes of work, or if you've done some major changes, you probably want to hit this other one here that says synchronize and modify all of your different settings. And what that's going to do is actually save this and synchronize it back to the central. What it does is it sends this information back to the central model, and then it also takes information from the central model and puts it back into your local copy. So obviously if your other group member has been saving, whatever has been put back into the central model is going to come into your model. And then you just keep kind of working like that, and that's really all there is to it, except that every time you open up your model, or actually when you close, you're going to have this little dialog box that pops up that says relinquish your elements and work sets. You always want to click on that, because basically what that means is anything that you've had control of, basically Revit is still talking back to the central model saying that you have control of it. And so if you close out of your program and you keep ownership of all these elements, and your group member is going to work through the night or whatever they're going to be doing, and you're not around, they're not going to be able to move any of the items that you had control of. So every time you close out, or after you've done your save and synchronize and then you close, you want to relinquish all your elements and then close out, and then you're good to go. And then when you open up in the morning, or the next time you need to open up a project, you could do two things. You could either just go back to your original local copy that you have on your computer. So I could just go back to this local copy, and as long as you're on the network, it'll automatically sync back up and talk back to the central model. In the office, we recommend once a week we stop referencing that local model, and we actually go back and start a new one. So we'll go to open, click on our central model, wherever that ended up. Got a lot of things here. Let's see. That's the So I'd go back to that central model and create a new local and click open. So every now and then it might be a good idea to do that. You're probably not working long enough in it at this point to really worry about that. So you just want to go back into your local copy, make sure you're connected to that hard drive, and then keep on working. And that's really all there is to it, other than making sure you hit save to central, and then you're pretty much good to go. The only issue is, like I said, you cannot move that particular model once it's on that local hard drive. One way to get around that, if you ever want to move it to another location and then eventually make a new central model, is I can actually open and go back to my central model location. And before I open this, there's another little icon over here, or a checkbox called Detach from Central. So if I actually click off the Create New Local and then go to Detach from Central and hit Open, there's this option here that says Detach and Discard Work Sets, or Detach and Preserve Work Sets. If you click the second one, it basically reverts your central model back to its original unshared condition, where you can actually move your file around freely. The reason you can't move your file from that central location is Revit automatically puts a bunch of links together to make the synchronization happen between the local and also your central model. And even if you move it in Windows, say if I copy it onto a USB stick and then take it home, Revit will know that you took it home or you moved it, and you could run into corruption issues. So once it's on that hard drive, wherever that's going to be located in the server or in the studio, that's where you're going to want to keep it through the next week. Any questions? Yeah.
I have two questions. To access the hard drive, you have to be in studio using the wireless that's connected to the hard drive.
That will be correct.
And you have to have the same versions of Revit when you're using the shared work set?
Yes. Everyone, yeah, you'll need to be on, I assume everyone's on Revit 2014. So obviously if you've been sharing your files back and forth between one another, you would have to be on the same version anyway, so I would expect, yeah, you would definitely have to be synced together on the same version with the same updates and so on. That was one question. That was two questions, right? Okay.
Good questions. If we have a shared model and if we're splitting up tasks, can you do those outside of Studio and then come in and update?
You can. When you do that and it's detached from, so you're talking about you take your laptop home and you're going to do some work. Revit's going to give you a warning when you open it up because it can't find the central model, and it'll just say, basically do this at your own risk. Because if something else changes on the central model before you sync back, it might not allow you to sync anymore. So there are some issues there where it could not talk to the model. So it depends. The one method for getting around that is you could do a bunch of work. Let's say you're doing some kind of editing on a wall section or you're setting up views. You can always copy and paste those into the central file once you bring it back if you lose the connection. But you could bring it back and try to hit sync back to central, and it might work. I can't guarantee. Because we've run into issues in the office with that happening, and what it will do is it'll say this file no longer talks to that central file, and so you kind of lose that connection. So you run that risk during that time. Any other questions on work sharing? I do have, of course, since I've been kind of making videos of everything throughout the years, I do have a video of work sharing that is actually from the Solar Decathlon days that kind of talks about these same issues or same topics. And I can give you a link to that if I can't find it here. Here's one. It's called Workshop 8 under Archives and the Solar Decathlon. Basically, it was setting up we had a Revit server that was set up in this room, and it was about how to connect to that. So there's a little bit more detail, obviously, in making that connection happen, but the concepts will still be the same in the way that you work in the model. And I believe we even tested it out in this tutorial so you could see how the synchronization was happening. So that might be a good reference. Anything else you want me to go over on work sharing or any other questions? Other than that, I will go around. I know everyone has, or some people have specific questions, so I'll go around and actually start helping people out. Okay?
Thanks.
So what I would do is we can actually open up a new, and if we go to curtain wall panel. The curtain wall panel, this will be something that we can actually model so that it's going to stretch, because basically this is going to stretch into whatever storefront divisions that you create with the storefront system. And so if you're making a louver, we can look at it in like an exterior view. And these boundary lines, so you've got the bottom, the top, and the left and right, those are basically the boundaries of where you would end up eventually having your mullions for your system. One thing I'm going to do is I need to model a blade. Do you have a blade shape that you were working with? Or I'll just do a generic one. So what you could do is just for the blade itself, I'm going to go to New Generic Model. And if you just create kind of this reference plane, I'm going to make it so that this can be parametric in length. So to do that, I can go ahead and make this an instance parameter, and I'll click on that dimension and go to Label, Add Parameter, and I'm going to call this Length, and I'll make it an instance. And all I'm doing there is so that I can eventually make it stretch.
So it's essentially the same as we did the railings in our workshop the other day.
Yeah, with the when we did the curtain wall ones, yeah. So I'm gonna just go into left view, and then I'll just make a louver blade kind of extrusion here. I'll just do something like that. Is that what you're kind of making? Well, whatever your profile is, but make this solid. And so I can take that and make sure I lock it to this other reference plane. Let's see if I can do if I change the length here, okay, this isn't. Here we go, got the padlock. So that should make it stretch now. I'm going to take a measurement of how big I drew this. It's about, I did like an 8-inch blade, that's probably pretty big, but we'll just for this purpose leave it like that. So if I save this, I'm going to save it as family, and I'll call this louver blade, and load that into this curtain panel. And what we can do is hit create component, and bring this in. It says none of the elements are visible. Why is that? So my view range, let me just click on view range. I'm going to make my cut plane like really high just because I think it's coming in too high. Let's see. View range, unlimited, bottom, unlimited level. There we go. So what you want to do is place this one time, and then we can get the array to work. I'm going to also center it. And then if you set this length, what we have to do, one little step here, I'm going to make a dimension from left to right on these reference planes. And if you make that into a reporting parameter, and the reason we need to make this reporting, so I'm going to click on add parameter, and I'll just call this length. And where it says instance, you can click on reporting parameter and click OK. What that will do is report whatever the length is that ends up in your storefront system. And so this way Revit knows how to report it back to this, basically this louver blade. I'm just going to move this blade up into there. So I'm going to click on the blade, and where we did the length, I'm going to make that equal to the reporting parameter that we just set up, and that'll always make it stretch, into there. And if we lock, align this and that side of the blade over there, that should make it so if I touch this reference plane and see how I start to move it, it's stretching. So to get the array to work, what you want to do is click on, I'm in a left elevation, if you click on the element and then click on array, I'm going to first make the array happen. So I'm going to, looks like go up 10 inches maybe, and then I can leave it at that for a moment. So basically you have to create an array, create it with whatever the spacing is going to be between blades. Then if you select that arrayed item, this might be kind of hard to see on the screen, but you can actually select the array dimension and make that into a parameter. So I can say add parameter, and we'll call this number of blades. Did you see that? Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'll make that an instance. Click OK. So now all we need is a way to calculate how many blades you need. So if you make a dimension in height, and we'll make that a reporting parameter. So I can go add parameter. Let's just call it height. If this is the instance and reporting, click OK.
And then the parameter for the distance between will be the height.
So you could say,
divided by the number.
Right, so you should say height divided by, what did I say, 10 inches is what I was doing my spacing. And that'll give you number of blades, and that will array it up. And so what should happen now is if I save this, call this parametric, let's just call it curtain panel louver blades, whatever. If I open or start a new project and load that in, so now I can go to, let's say, wall, and I'll do it as a storefront. You know that we've done the difference of all that, so I'll go to this, and then what you're going to do is where it says storefront curtain panel, right now it's always set to glazed. I'm going to duplicate this and actually call it louver. And we should be able to change that to find your louver blade, and then click OK. And now,
5 feet, 5 feet, does it really want to be 5 feet?
view 3D. It looks like my array almost worked. So something, go back to that. So you actually see what it's doing, but somehow the something with the lock happened. Let's see. Level, elevation. That's the louver blade. So if I click on edit group on this, I'm going to make sure I lock that group. I think that might have been the problem. There you go. So now you can, draw it however you need to, and the comment was about the height was 75 feet. So obviously, if you're going to have a louver that's 75 feet, you're going to have these mullions at probably 5 feet intervals or something like that. That's going to break it apart into individual components. And so if you already have that set up as that, basically a parametric panel, you could either set it up as a storefront system and make it easy, kind of equal everywhere, or you could also put that in a curtain wall and then divide it up whatever pattern that you want to match probably your mullions behind or whatever you want to do. So you want to model this as a separate curtain wall that's kind of floating, in front of your other facade.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So change your profile blade however you want. So to change your, if you're using a structural, let me close out of that.
Right now, our floors are still generic.
Okay,
But,
so
we'll have to-
what you'll want to do if you have like a generic floor, so what's your floor type now?
Right now, it's just generic. So I actually have to build the pieces So in our design, it's just steel beams with composite deck on top and a raised floor system on top of that.
So you can select your generic floor just like this, and you'll want to pick the one up here called 3-inch lightweight concrete on 2-inch metal deck.
Okay.
Because this one's set up as a structural composite deck system already. And if you click on edit and look at the structure, you'll see here it has metal deck,
Okay.
and there's no dimension there, and that's because it actually cuts out the metal deck out of the slab, but it's only going to
Okay.
show up in section, but in
So
3D it's going to still look like a solid slab.
Solid slab. Okay, so I would put for the concrete, I would put the dimension that I want the two to be.
The two to be together. So typically you'd probably have a 5 1/4 inch deck or something system, or you might have 7 1/4, whatever. So you would want to pick that. Then to play around with the directionality, so if I cut a section through this in both ways, so when you look at it, and the composite deck's only going to show up when you go to a fine view, then you see it.
Okay.
Of course, you want to probably be at a larger scale. So in this case, in that section, you actually see the deck,
Yeah.
or actually the cutout. But if I go to the other section, I'm only going to see it where it's parallel. So to change that, if it's not going the right direction for you, when you click on this slab and click on edit boundary, see that equal sign?
Oh, yeah.
That's showing you the direction.
Okay.
And so if you want to change it, there's an option here called span direction. You click on that and you just click the other line.
Nice. Okay.
And that would change it to the other direction
That's
it needs to
easy
go.
enough.
And it's only going to go the direction of whatever your boundary lines are. So if you wanted, for some reason, your deck is going 45 degrees or something like that.
Yeah, ours definitely is.
You would actually need to make sure your floor slab had that angle in it somewhere, because then you can pick span direction and then pick that.
So-
if it doesn't have that in the boundary, you're not going to be able to control the span direction.
So because our floor plates are very odd polygons, but our beams and columns are on a grid. So would I potentially have, and I can't remember to be honest, I suspect that most of our floor boundaries do not have an edge that is going in the span direction. Would I just draw the two floors so that I can split the floor plate so that I can get an edge that is running in the correct span direction?
Yes, you could do that. But typically, your structure, I haven't looked at your structural system, but typically if you had,
So we end up with cantilevers around the entire edge of the floor plate.
right, but typically your structure, for instance, would be, let me just place these real quick. Let's say you have bays like this, right?
Yeah.
And they're generally going to be in some kind of orthogonal pattern
Definitely, yeah.
until you get to the edge, and that's where you've got the difference. So let me just do another one here. 25 feet. So you might have structural bays that are moving like this, and then eventually you have this guy is out here, right?
Yeah.
So your span direction, though, would typically be based on your beams below.
Yeah.
So if your beams are going like this, and I can't see that because change my view range here. So you've got your main, beams that are going across. I should do this better here. Let's hit multiple. So whatever your system is, and then you would typically have, infill in between. So typically you're spanning the short direction. So
Yeah.
let me just do it long beam here. Something like that. And then you'd have your beam system, because your composite deck can't span more than 6 feet usually. So if you want to go the short direction, in this case, I'll just say it's all that way. Your deck is always going to go perpendicular.
To the smallest set of beams.
Yeah. So in this case, your deck would be running in this direction. Even when it gets to here, they would still run it this way. And then you'd have your cantilevered edge, or however that you're dealing with that. Obviously, that's a little bit extreme there, but I mean, that's typically how you would kind of span that. So rarely, I think you would have a 45-degree one that you'd have to worry about. But if you did, then you'd have to split it up.
The structural system itself is orthogonal, but since the span direction looks like it's based on the edge of the floor boundary, so our floor boundary, when you look at it, nothing is orthogonal.
Okay. So in that case, you would probably have to split it up where...
Just pick a beam and split it, and then use that edge.
And
make sure to split it in an area so that I can actually use that as my span direction.
Exactly. And the other part of that would be, so let's say you split this into two. Let me copy to clipboard. So let's say that's, one of your components. If I create similar, paste aligned. And here's my other one. What you'll end up with is obviously a line, separating the two as you start to split this up.
Yeah.
But what you could do is hit modify and join, and you could join these back together, and I'll remove the line, but it'll still keep it where I can select the individual parts of the floor.
And
So-
that,
so-
so I'd still be able to, because I can select the different parts of the floor, I'd still be able, I see the span direction.
Yeah, you can change
Okay.
the span direction in each of
Nice.
these.
On the exterior one, yes, thank you.
So I could do that one and then come into this one, and there's that one that has a different span
Yeah.
direction.
And I think our span direction would end up being the same throughout, because the structural system is the same throughout, but it's just finding that edge to be able to tell it what direction.
Yep.